Bonjour, hello, quoi? Je m'appelle Susan Spronk, je suis la directrice de l'École de développement international et mondialisation à l'Université d'Ottawa. My name is Susan Spronk, and I am the director of the School of International Development and Global Studies. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here for this book launch. I would like to start today with a land acknowledgement. This land acknowledgement comes from the University of Ottawa. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Please note that we are recording this session. I'd like to welcome all of the contributors to this fine volume, all the friends who have joined us. Special shout out to all of those of you who join us from the broader community of the School of International Development. Welcome. Thank you for taking time this afternoon to be with us. I'm going to start with telling you about what's going to happen in the hour we have together, also a little bit of housekeeping, and then introduce the speakers. So we're going to hear from Fayaz, who's one of the editors of the book, and it's my great pleasure to also welcome and introduce Margaret Catley-Collison and Bridget Papp, who are going to be sharing with us their thoughts on this edited collection. A reminder to everybody that, except for the panelists, it would be very helpful if you can keep your microphone off. We've muted you, but also your camera off, unless you are speaking. The reason why we ask you to do that is it does help with accessibility, particularly for those of people who may be joining us from remote communities where internet is not readily available. So that said, my job mostly here is to welcome you and to act as timekeeper, and I'm going to pass it off very quickly to my colleague Fayaz Backer, and let me please introduce our three speakers, Fayaz, Maggie, and Bridget. So Fayaz Backer is a development practitioner and was a visiting professor at the University of Ottawa from 2018 to 2020. During the past 3 decades, he's been engaged in managing grant programs for supporting Local Agenda 21. He's advised, researched, taught, and written on innovative practices for achieving global development goals through local action. Special focus of his work has been on poverty alleviation, participatory development, and social entrepreneurship, and he is one of the co-editors of this book that we're talking about today. Margaret Catley-Collison, who is Order of Canada. Margaret has over 4 decades of experience as a public servant working for the United Nations and the Government of Canada in various capacities, including as the president of the former Canadian International Development Agency. She has served on the Board of Governors of the International Development the International Development Research Centre of Canada, and is a trustee of the board of the International Institute for the Environment and Development. She was chair and is now a patron of the Global Water Partnership. Bridget Papp has over 15 years of experience leading and supporting environmental and social justice initiatives. As a grant specialist at the Winnipeg Foundation, she is responsible for many granting programs focused on community development in Winnipeg. As a social innovation fellow, her research is focused on foundation investing in climate solution using an equity lens. She's completing her Master's of Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership at Carleton University, and she received an honors in Bachelor of Social Sciences in International Development and Globalization from the University of Ottawa as a Lawrence Scholar. And a little inside information about Bridget is that we were in Bolivia together, I think in 2010, 2009, and one of her nicknames is Brigada in Spanish because it means brigade, and I think it's very fitting for her. So welcome to you. Wonderful to meet Maggie here. Nice to see you again, Bridget. And Fayaz, please take it away.
Okay, great. I have to mention, just to introduce the book, I think there were 4 points behind compiling this book and asking various people to join. I will be acknowledging people as Susan has acknowledged the land. People means those who contributed to the book. It's important to talk about them. We have people from Pakistan to Netherlands, Sweden, USA, and Canada. And it includes professors, academics, students, PhD students, and activists. And there are two activists from Helmgate Tenant Coalition in Ottawa. So I'll briefly take their names and introduce because it's very important. That is what has made this book so interesting. And when we started, we talked to the outlet that we have to make it accessible. So it has to be written in a language which is accessible to young people and people who are not specialists, to common readers. And second was in terms of prices. So we requested them that it should not be published only as a hardbound book, but as a paperback. And they agreed to this. So that's very good. So it becomes affordable for young people to buy it. And also it's Kindle edition. There are four ideas behind the book. One is that there are many words in one word. And one word cannot be given the status of the end of history, representing the most developed and most advanced, and the others being less developed and lower on the ladder. They all are equally important. And it's a matter of choice for the people. And if we think that freedom is enlarging the range of choices of people, then we should make them aware also that many words exist at the same time. It's not only the neoliberal market-based word, but pre-market, which we call subsistence economy or sovereignty economy or solidarity economy, whatever. That was the first point. Second was that there is no singularity of truth. In the name of science, we establish the given view of the economy, people, and society, which is ahistorical, which is apolitical, and which is non-contextual. And it is presented as eternal truth. We wanted to make the point that there are so many other economies which exist simultaneously, and so it should be looked at in that context. So there is no singularity of truth. They're all true at the same time. So the conventional view of science that there can be only one truth and everything else is non-truth. We don't agree with this. And the third point was that the concepts of success or freedom or happiness or advancement, it is not a zero-sum concept. It doesn't mean that one person or one nation or one community's success can only take place if there is loss of other communities and people and nations. So we can have a non-zero sum or non-zero society at a global level as well as national and local level. These were the 3 points we had in mind. And fourth is that the path to bringing these together, there are 3 paths. One is the path of dependence. The other is the path of independence. But there is a third path of interdependence, where we know that we are all interdependent and we could still create room for one another and we can all be happy at the same time, not one at the expense of the other. These were the 4 ideas behind the book. I will not talk more about it. Those of you who have not seen it, this is the book. And our contributors must have, but since, someone asked Einstein his phone number, so he opened his directory. And they said, why? He said, I don't keep things which can be kept in the shelf in my mind. So I'm going to read the names from this book. I don't know them by heart, but it is important. We started with 19 contributors, and 5 of them dropped because of the COVID or COVID-related pressure of work on them. But I am so happy that many others came up. One of them was Caroline Laude, who is an indigenous scholar, and she happily agreed at a much later stage to contribute a chapter. Rasool Bakhsh Rais from Pakistan, he contributed a chapter. And Patricia Glazer-Brook from USA. So I'm especially thankful to them. So we are able to keep the length of the book as it was, but the contributors include myself, Susan Spronk, Adrian Murray, Syed Mansoor Murshid, who is at Institute of Social Studies, The Hague, Netherlands, Patricia Glazebrook from Washington State University, Furqan Asif, who did his PhD here, but he is now teaching in the Netherlands, Abdullah Al Mamoon, who is our PhD student from Bangladesh, who is here with the School of International Development and Global Studies, Sunny Yaya, who is co-editor of the book. At present, he is Vice President Academic. And then Helena Yeboah and Ogochukwu Udinigwe, if I'm pronouncing it right. Nima Hussain and Josh Holle are both activists at the Helen Gay Talent Coalition in Ottawa. And Juan Velasquez from Gothenburg University, Sweden. Sayyid Sajjadur Rahman, Caroline Laude. These are the contributors. I thought I should take their name, and I hope that they will be speaking also when we open the floor. So this was briefly, keeping in view the time constraint, I thought I should make it very brief.
Great.
So,
Thank you very much, Fayez. Maggie, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm waiting for myself to come on the screen, but maybe that isn't, maybe it doesn't
you
happen.
are on the screen.
Okay, good enough. I see you, not me, but anyway, that's fine. Good morning, everyone. It's very good to be with you this morning. I have two things to show off this morning. My shot, which I got yesterday, so I'm very happy about having had the second shot and starting to feel more protective against this nasty scourge. I also want to say thank you and hello to a whole group of people, including some former CETA colleagues. I can see Shoaib Sultan Khan up there in the corner. It's a great pleasure to be among you and a great honor to be invited this morning to launch this very interesting and appreciated book. If it's possible to, no, I guess not. Okay, well, I'll just have to take it that it's going through. As I say, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to talk to you from very far west, the land of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam. I think it's a very good thing that we give tribute to those that have been on these lands for a long time. Interestingly enough, I've got 4 points I wanted to make today. Interestingly enough, I happened to be at the birth of the Washington Consensus. I was on a water commission for the World Bank, looking at water in the 21st century. And the whole commission was invited to go to this lunch, none of which knew what it was all about. It was in a very elegant hotel and the lunch was very good. What turned out to be there was USAID, the World Bank, IMF, and I suppose a few illustrious diplomats. But it was a very interesting event. Everybody looked very happy with themselves. Mind you, at that stage, we were looking at the 10 points that were involved in the Washington Consensus and not the drift towards the neoliberalism advocacy that later happened. But I was interested in reading through this book, how many times the writers said that they were participating in the wake of the Washington Consensus. In other words, it's gone. It's a dead idea. So there you are. If you live long enough, you get to be at the birth and possibly at the mortuary experience of different ideas. But I think this book picking up and saying this is the successor, one of the successors to that way of thinking plays a signal service. It makes us think about this. I found it interesting for 4 spectrums that are set out in it. And Fayez has mentioned one of them, and that is the wide and aggregate spectrum of the global experience of the authors. It really does go right across the globe. There's also a very wide spectrum in the nationalities, the experiences, the geneities. It's wonderful to have something rather than a very homogeneous collection to look at a number of issues, and I think that has definitely been the case here. I was delighted to see the range of sectoral issues, and particularly pleased to see a piece on population, because after the Cairo conference in 1982, demography dropped way down in the topics that were discussed, and I think it's a very relevant topic to be discussing in the development context. So glad to see a piece on population. Also very glad to see the pieces on housing and on the use of the legal system to take on some of the issues that exist. So that was two spectra that I found very interesting. The third spectrum I found very interesting was different tools that could be used to try and make things happen. And I want to come back to that. The fourth was that I looked for was some spectrum in ideology. That I did not find so much. There's a rather grouping of an ideological perspective and outlook. Possibly if I had been able to get through the whole book, I would have found somewhat more variety, but great variety in experience, in topics and subjects, good variety in the issues taken on, ideology rather less so. The other one that I found not so much present was, how do you make your thoughts happen? How do you turn your thoughts into changed realities in the places in which people wish to work? And that is a gentleman who has devoted his whole life to that is one of the links between Fayez and myself. And in fact, Fayez is bringing out another book this year talking about exactly this issue. How do you take a concept, a wish, a will, a vision of what you want to create? How do you turn that into a reality when you're faced with the actual reality of people's lives and of community organization? And Shahab Sultan Khan, who is on our screens, has been a towering presence in this area. And I want to say that Fayez himself, in recording how this all worked, has been a towering presence too. And he's going to bring out a book later this year. And I truly commend it to people. If you want to see something that moves from the reality that you wish to create to the realities that you must begin with, and how you can shape these through different forms of social organization and different forms of getting people, helping people to interact together. It began when Pakistan was really in the village, in the country areas, moving out of the feudal period and moving towards trying to find some form of regional development. And the book that Fayez, I have never seen anything so detailed, down to where is the project director sleeping at night? Is he sleeping in a house, or is he sleeping in a tent out with the people that he is working with? It is a very interesting book, and it certainly fulfilled my wish that more books pay attention to, okay, you've got an idea, you've got a concept, you've got something that you want to do. How do you make that happen? And so the how you make it happen is very much taken up in this. So it'd be lovely if we had all the time in the world. And I'd love to hear from some of the writers in this book as to how do you make some of these happen. And we've had some advice from some, but I think going further in that direction is greatly to be wished and advised. And I wish this book all possible success, and also its writers and editors. And I thank you very much for allowing me to come along and be part of the opening of a book which represents such a lot of endeavor, such a lot of work. And I congratulate you all. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you so much. So I believe that Maggie has put a challenge on the table, which is the contributors who are in the room. There will be time after Bridget speaks to try to address the question, how is this going to happen? But floor over to you, Bridget. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am so thrilled and honored to be here today. And I am calling from Winnipeg. So thank you so much, Susan or Susanna in Bolivia and Fayez for inviting me. I'm so thrilled to be here. And to Maggie for sharing your insights. I'm calling from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional gathering place of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. And I want to offer thanks for the stewardship and protection of the land that gives us life every day. And our water here is sourced from Winnipeg, from Shoal Lake First Nation. And I want to recognize that the thoughts that I'm sharing today are my own and don't represent the views of the organizations where I work. This is a wonderful book, and it has been so refreshing for me to read it the past week or so. And it's really been insightful, and I find that it puts forward a real understanding of the brokenness of the world and the problems with neoliberal systems and the grave inequities that we are seeing. There's a report from Oxfam that notes that 2,000 billionaires have more wealth than the 4.6 billion people who make up 60% of the population. So I found that it had a really amazing analysis of the problems, and it also put forward some really important, bold alternatives for what is the equitable and just future that we're seeking to create. This is really meaningful for me because Professor Spronk is one of the best professors I've ever had, and I learned so much through our work in Bolivia and seeing Indigenous-led people's movements marching against water privatization and for the right to water really inspired me in my work to do community organizing, including around the right to water and in solidarity with Shoal Lake First Nation. So a massive injustice here is that the community lacked access to their own drinking water when it supplied the drinking water for all of Winnipeg. And this echoes one of the points that's raised on page 19. In Canada, the gains of the Golden Age have never been shared with the First Nation, Métis, or Inuit people who were dispossessed of their lands and territory. Until 1960, Indigenous people with status were not even allowed to vote. We also see a remarkable resilience and strength of the Indigenous community on Turtle Island. Shoal Lake 40 successfully campaigned for Freedom Road and a water treatment plant for their community. So we see them putting ideas into practice. And I want to share one of my favorite songs, which connects with some of the themes of the book, and I would play it, but I don't want to for copyrights. And I would sing them for you, but that's not a good idea for anyone. So I'll just tell you about them. One of them is Electric Powwow Drum from Tribe Called Red. Is anyone familiar with Tribe Called Red? Okay, awesome, yes. And so they're talking about Indigenous resurgence. And I see that one of the key themes in the book is really about understanding and honoring diverse cultures and diverse ways of being. The other song that this book reminded me of is Rit Segonde by the Quebec band Cowboy Fringant. And it talks about military spending, oil extraction, water privatization, while children in the global south don't have access to water. And this really relates to a key theme in the book, which Fayez so eloquently talked about in terms of the need for a solidarity economy. So if we go to page 9, a solidarity economy is our only hope, and it means reallocating resources from private to public spending, from arms manufacturing to healthcare and education, from unemployment benefits to universal basic income, from discrimination in wages to equal pay for equal work, from conquering nature to reintegrating with nature, and much more. We see this brokenness of the world in failing to recognize diversity as a form in unity in the past 2 weeks with the 215 children who were found buried at Kamloops Residential School, with the killings of the Muslim family in London, Ontario, and our hearts are heavy. We also see anti-racist movements and Black Lives Matter, we see how the world is waking up and understands this need for collective action to stop these racist crimes from continuing, to support healing and justice for families, to ensure that all people feel safe and that diverse communities and cultures are respected and celebrated. So what can we do as we seek to be allies? Professor Spronks notes the rapid influx of organized movements since the 1960s, such as Occupy and Black Lives Matter. One of the things that we can do is support these equity-seeking groups, organizations, and movements. We can advance the truth and reconciliation calls to action. And we can amplify the amazing work that is being done by BIPOC-led organizations and movements. I wanted to highlight the chapter by Carolyn Lode, who shares insights on how capitalist expansion has come at the expense of Indigenous communities. And she raises some really important points in terms of superficial understandings of reconciliation, which do not recognize Indigenous title. And she makes a really excellent point that genuine reconciliation is a tool to decolonize and improve power sharing and collaborative problem solving locally, nationally, and globally. On the note of climate, I love the chapter from Tricia Glazebrook, which explores how the transition from fossil fuels is deeply related to moving away from the objectification of women. What we need is not just transition, but a just transition. And I also very much appreciated the chapter by Furkan Asif on decarbonizing the economy, including that barriers are largely political and social, not technological or economic. That means we actually have the technology, we have the funds, and now what we need is the political and the social will. It's inspiring to see leaders and the movement for a Green New Deal and global climate strikes, including some concrete gains. So in the book, there is some ties to the understanding of decarbonizing the economy, which reminded me of Diversifying Power, another book about why we need feminist anti-racist leadership on climate, whereby the presidential order includes that 40% of renewable energy must be for disadvantaged communities in the States. How could we legislate something similar or stronger in Canada? How can we prioritize funding for groups like Indigenous Clean Energy, Aki Energy, and conservation through reconciliation? And as Maggie raised the important question, how can we implement, operationalize, and create the solutions that we're seeking to see in the world? So I just want to end by thanking all the contributors of the book for your amazing, insightful work. I so appreciated the book, its soulful writing, the radically honest look at problems with neoliberal systems, the understandings of the brokenness of the world, but also the refreshing and bold visions for a more sustainable, just, and equitable world. I'm reminded by the quote of Adrienne Marie Brown. I think it is healing behavior to look at something so broken and see the possibility and wholeness in it.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit moved, so I have to collect my thoughts. Wow. Both speakers gave us so much to think about in terms of reflecting on the themes of this book and also challenging us to think about what's ahead of us, which needs also to focus on trauma and healing, especially given the events which have unfolded on Turtle Island in our communities in the last few weeks. So thank you for reminding us of that. One of the reasons that I've always been a staunch supporter of Fayez's projects is he does include in his book projects such a diverse community of scholars at different stages in their career and activists, scholars, and activists. So that said, we are going to have time for some reactions and some interventions, and it's really a great pleasure that so many of our contributors are able to be with us. So if I may take my prerogative as chair and give preference to those who are in the room who have contributed to this book, because it is an enormous accomplishment, all the chapters that you've contributed. I would like to invite the audience to intervene in order that we have enough time, and I'd also like to make sure we keep enough time at the end so we hear from our distinguished guests again. Please keep your interventions and comments to around 2 minutes. Would be very appreciated. In order to tell me that you would like to speak, if you are able, using your microphone, we will unmute you. You may either let me know by using the feature of reactions by raise hand, or telling me in the chat that you would like to speak. Is there someone amongst you who would like to start us off?
Susan,
Patricia actually has her hand up.
Yeah.
Patricia has her hand up, but do you
Yeah.
want to save those thoughts?
I just want to
Fayez?
say, a few words.
Sure.
I just wanted to introduce all our participants to Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, who is here. And Maggie talked about him in terms of solution. You know, when we talk of the path of healing, that is what he has been doing. He started in northern areas of Pakistan, then went to India. He did work in Sri Lanka. So he has worked in the largest concentration of people living under poverty, which is South Asia, for the last 50 years. And that is why the way he worked, he has one other distinction, that he has kept record of every meeting he had with the communities, with the leaders, with the decision makers for the last 60 years, and they're called note for record. And I had the honor of editing those notes for record, 1,100 pages. And it will be coming out as the next book, and it is called Social Transformation of Pakistan, the Art and Science of Dealing with the Other. So that is one of the ways. So I just wanted all of you to know, and we have the honor of having him here. I hope he would like to speak in the end if he wants to share some of his thoughts. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Are you asking me to go ahead?
Um,
Glazberg?
I
Or
think
did you have
that-
someone?
I think Fayez had passed the speaking stick, so to speak, to his colleague, but Patricia, could you
Oh, no
lead us
problem.
off after that? That would be wonderful.
Thanks,
So I will
thanks.
write that down. Thank you.
I wasn't sure who you were talking to.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes? Yeah, I think let's begin with Patricia if she wants to.
Okay,
Yeah.
Patricia. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Patricia. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just let me tell you first that I'm on the ceded land of the Nez Perce tribe in the traditional homeland of the Palouse Band. And I wish to acknowledge their presence here and also recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. I actually just wanted to make a response comment to Brigitte's wonderful accounting of the book, and detailed as well. And I just wanted to let you know that in the area where I work, there are 22 men in the global north who have together the wealth of all of the women who live in Africa and work in Africa. And I think that's really telling about gender bias internationally and globally. And so I just wanted to introduce the notion of gender into the discussion as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to Fayez for all your work on this book, and also Sani Yaya for the support that he gave. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm looking through the other person who has their hand up is Sajat. Sajat.
Thanks, Adelaide. I hope you can see me now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Like Margaret, thanks very much to Faiz and Sani for letting me contribute to this book. the question, it seems to be from the reviewers, where what's going to happen. So I'm going to try and sort of give you my take on what's going to happen. By the way, I'm the author of the chapter 13. This is the one with the post-Bretton Woods world. So there are three trends that one sees right now. One is that the southern countries are increasingly taking ownership of their own development processes and reducing their dependency on international development assistance. The second is the increasing weight of alternative donor groups, and institutions like the BRI and the AIIB have reduced space for the northern counterparts. The third trend one sees is the anti-globalization and isolationist postures of many northern countries have resulted in reduced interest and hence funding for southern development. Right? So I cite Mark Brown in my chapter, who says that we have arguably the most disappointing sets of governments globally that we've had in a very long time. This isn't just a coincidence of election, it's a world that's deeply frustrated by the failure of the last generation of the governments to address growing problems of inequality, exclusion, and the marginalization of people. So what's going to happen now is, and especially because of the COVID pandemic and its after effect, is that the increasing fiscal and monetary expansions to offset the impacts of the pandemic have triggered historic government deficits in the donor countries. This means the availability of international development financing will reduce significantly, especially when the governments start paying back their debts, to reduce deficits in the post-pandemic area. And trust me, this is going to happen because I managed the last strategic and operating review of the Government of Canada on international development assistance. So I know that it's coming. Most southern nations will have to generally fend for themselves for the foreseeable future, and many of them may lose much of the economic and social gains achieved in the last decade. Finally, second impact will be more hegemonical. Historically, responses to global disasters have been led by the US and its northern allies. However, one of the characteristics of the COVID crisis has been a marked lack of US leadership. It has not rallied the world in a collective effort to confront the virus or its economic impact. In contrast, China, even though the virus originated there, has stepped into the leadership void to help share information. This is a further nail in the coffin in the unipolar US-led neoliberal global order and a signal of a post-Bretton Woods multipolar world. Thanks. That's what I have to say.
Great. Shab Sultan Khan, Fayaz, and I are inviting you to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, and I'm indeed delighted to see Margaret, and of course Fayaz also. The reference that Margaret made, in fact, she made it happen, because I was in UNICEF in 1982 and she was in UNICEF. And when the Aga Khan Foundation Geneva wanted me to implement this Aga Khan Gold Sport program, I put a condition that I would only join if UNICEF allows me to go on deputation. And I don't know how Margaret managed it, because normally it doesn't happen. So I'm so grateful. And I'm so thankful to Margaret for saying something about what really is Fayaz is doing, because he's such a versatile person. I mean, normally There are jacks of all trade, but he's really master of all trade. Keeps on doing all kinds of things. I mean, he looks at my mundane notes for record and say, well, this is something, it should be a book. And then he has converted it into a book. I'm so grateful to him. And basically, as Margaret mentioned, I mean, this gave me an opportunity, the Aga Khan Rural Support Program, to work with 1 million people in one of the most hostile terrains of the world, where you have, I think, 8 of the highest peaks of the world, including K2. And there are these households which were really, compared to the rest of Pakistan, the poorest of the poor. But fortunately, I had a mentor, Dr. Hamid Khan, who had taught me that if you want to really help the poor, then they cannot be helped individually. They have to get organized. And then also that even the poorest of the poor has the potential to do something to improve their livelihood.
Hmm.
So with these 2 principles, I went to the people and said that, look, instead of you asking me to do something, I will ask you to do something. This is a partnership, development partnership. And if you fulfill your obligations of the partnership, then only we can work with you, which was really for them to get organized and then also find a honest leader amongst themselves. And secondly, as capital is power, that they have to adopt the discipline of savings. And thirdly, of course, that you have the potential, identify what that potential is and why are you not able to unleash it, men and women. And I mean, over these years and years of my experience, both in Pakistan and India, I didn't come across a single poor rural woman or man who said that we don't have the potential to do anything. And now these programs which we implemented, well, if I'm immodest, I can say that almost 200 million rural poor of Pakistan and India really adopted this approach. So Margaret, I'm very grateful to you that in this discussion, which was really about a book which, again, I mean, I'm looking forward to reading it, although I know that it will be like a Latin and Greek to me, because these are such, when compared to my worm's eye view, this is really a bird's eye view. But it was very interesting to hear what a wonderful book has been produced. So thank you very much, Susan, for inviting me, and thanks, Margaret. You're looking younger than when I last met you about 20 years ago. How do you manage that?
Thank you so much. We've read your work in my class, so it's an honor to meet you. May I please invite Juan to speak next?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to participate in this anthology, and I am very grateful to say thank you to Fayaz, especially because Fayaz was visiting scholar at the University of Gothenburg, and it was very nice to have a chat and to discuss the particularities of this situation that pushed Fayaz to come to Sweden, and it was more or less a situation regarding solidarity at a global level. So because of this situation, we entangled into each other. I invited Fayaz to participate in one of my courses as a visiting scholar from Scholars at Risk. And it was for me very honoring to invite a scholar from Pakistan, and especially to make a contribution regarding the particular special way in which Gayatri Spivak analyzes colonial conditions. So since then, so Fayaz traveled forward, and then from the other side of the ocean, so I get the invitation to participate in this anthology. I was very occupied with a lot of things and very stressed and sick. But anyway, so Fayaz insisted that I have to make a contribution to the anthology. So I was very happy to see how solidarity works in between scholars, because this is something that sometimes are very rare. But in regards to this question of solidarity, so my contribution to the anthology is more related to this question about solidarity too, but in a historical way, which we see, for example, the way in which Haiti started a big wave of revolutions in the world, and was in many ways inspiring a lot of people and inspiring a lot of revolutions to take to another level of insurrectional and evolution of the way in which we can overcome racism in societies. So unfortunately, in the chapter, I try to explain the way in which Haiti become abandoned by the Creole elites that at the end conquer the power after defeating the Spanish Empire. And it continues in the same way when it comes to Venezuela. And at the moment, I think that it is interesting also to see the way in which, for example, Cuba, which is a very blame community, a very blame country and nation, has been standing for different kinds of solidarity approaches towards the global south. So I think that it was very pleasant to write this piece of this chapter, because it was very liberating to take the story of Haiti again, and then try to have a overview of the conditions in which, for example, the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela has taken into another direction, and just because the lack and the misuse of solidarity. So I'm very happy to be here and to share these ideas and to take and listen to you, and I see forward to continue the collaboration with us. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Farkan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Susan. Also, just wanted to thank the preceding speakers and for following up with them and their words. Thanks to Margaret. Thanks to Shoaib. Thanks to Fayaz and Bridget for your wonderful reflections and commentary. As for those of you who don't know, I'm a contributor that wrote the chapter on human needs versus human greed, the need for global decarbonization for a global economy. And the premise of this, I'm an environmental social scientist, and so I naturally think about these kinds of things. But the premise or the inspiration for me to write this chapter was I had the audience in mind of an undergrad student or a student in general who was looking at our climate crisis and looking at the way the world is going and the feeling of hopelessness. And let me tell you, when you're writing a book on decarbonization and climate change, it's very challenging to be optimistic. And I think that was something I faced on a personal level, but I also face that whenever I teach about this topic. But my intention was to reframe our understanding similar to what my other colleagues do in their own ways, of looking at how we actually need to be thinking differently when it comes to climate change. And I would argue that, you know, of course, there's a multiple issues in our society that we have to deal with, but I think that elephant in the room of an impeding climate crisis and how it's going to affect everybody, regardless of what class you are in some way, shape, or form, is something that we really need to think about. And so in my book chapter, I talk about this notion of human needs and the idea that what we've lost sight of as a society has been the shaping society to serve human needs and and have as the preface of human needs the need for human liberation, which is the idea of maximizing individual and collective choice in meeting those basic needs. The way our current economic system is set up, it just does not serve that, because people are forced to work in these gig economy sort of things, and these gigs, and are arguably not actually having much choice. The other thing that I need to point out from a systemic point of view is that when we look at climate change, we can just easily see who the culprits are. So in the book, I talk about how 90 companies are responsible for 2/3 of the world's emissions until 2010, and about half of that was emitted since 1986, and it's largely driven by fossil fuel and cement production. And so part of it is just this reframing of our entire way of organizing our economy. And I think that I also highlight the paradox of the very conveniences and the standard of living that a lot of us enjoy are due to those emissions. So there's also this interesting paradox that we have to be honest about, and not necessarily say everything is crap and we should, you know, there's a certain acknowledgement, and I think it's an inconvenient truth that we have to face. And the last thing I want to say is that I do wrap up my book chapter in a sort of a optimistic tone, because I highlight the successes we've had that involved collective action. I speak of how it was normal to have child labor in coal mines, for example, in England, and how it was normal to pollute the environment, and it was just as a given. And perhaps probably the most inspiring example I give is the example of the Montreal Protocol, and the action that the world or our society took to healing the ozone hole that was created. And I think that these kinds of examples provide a sort of semblance of hope, that it's not like all of the challenges we face as society, as humans, we have been able to surpass them or find ways and find solutions to them. So I think that that's sort of where I would like to end. And hopefully also, just a minor note is that I would like to thank everyone who's attended or who's listening right now. And I encourage those of us who are educators and activists to use the material and the knowledge in this book and really mobilize it and include it in your teaching, in your activism. And surely I'll have the same intentions as well. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Furkan. So I would love to hear some final words from our distinguished guests who took time to read our book and reflect on the chapters. I would like to invite Bridget first, and then we'll hear from Maggie.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I find it really important to come to terms and be honest with some of the problems that we're facing, but also to unite and gain strength in a shared vision for a better world. And I think that really came through. And I think it's important to remember that we will face resistance to some of these ideas as we try to pursue social change. But I think that it's in coming together in forums like these, in conversation, in community with people who share that vision for a better world, that we gain strength. So thank you so much. I found this really uplifting.
Thank you. Maggie.
Maggie is muted, so we can't hear her.
Yes, I'm asking her to unmute. Thank you.
Right, here we are. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Very glad to participate in this conversation. It's left me with a real desire to go back and to read the parts of the book that I didn't get to work on. And I particularly enjoyed Brigitte's comments. I found them quite inspiring, if cautionary. And also the comments of the others. And I can only repeat myself in wishing that this book has good legs, as they say, that it walks into many libraries and many computer screens and shares the wisdom that is in there from this wide, impressive spectrum of authors, both in global knowledge and in the sectoral issues. So well done, all of you. Well done, Faiz and Yaya. This is a very good contribution, and it would be lovely to think that those of us this morning have made a tiny contribution to accelerating it even further. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So it's with some sadness that I'm going to close this session. I'd like to thank again Maggie and Brigitte for coming to share your thoughts with us. It's so wonderful to hear from people at different stages in our life paths. And I also will quote, you cannot help anyone individually. We have to get organized. It's wonderful to hear positive references as well to countries that are doing it differently, such as in COVID vaccines, just as Cuba. So I really enjoyed this event. I'd like to close by thanking Fayez for bringing us together, and also Sani Yaya, who is not able to be with us today. He's very busy being Vice President of the Francophonie and Internationalization at the University of Ottawa. But thank you to him. He's instrumental. A lot of his students are part of this collection. So thank you to all of you. And then also thank you to Adrian Murray, who played an instrumental role behind the scenes, sending us emails and reminding us to send in our edited versions and keeping on top of the whole thing. So thank you to Adrian. Adrian's also been helping with this webinar. So thank you for the behind the scenes support. And Adrian is also an author of one of the chapters of this book. So thank you for that too. So with that, I'd like to say miigwech, au revoir, and goodbye. And also do not forget to buy the book.
Great. Thank you, Faiz.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
I wish we could get everyone on board, but yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Also, if someone can
Faiz in particular.
chat for the book, that'd be great. Wonderful.
Have a nice time. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
summer.
Thank you.
Bye, one.